David Hartman considered himself a man of many aspirations but few victories. A struggling writer living in a cramped apartment, he was no stranger to rejection letters and dwindling bank accounts. The creative spark that had once fueled his dreams of becoming a best-selling author had dimmed, leaving him restless and desperate for inspiration. It was during one of his aimless strolls through the city that he stumbled upon a flea market tucked away in a narrow alley. The market was a labyrinth of cluttered stalls, each brimming with forgotten trinkets and faded memories. David's attention was drawn to a dusty, leather-bound journal resting on a vendor's table. Its cracked cover and tarnished brass clasp hinted at age, and something about its worn appearance resonated with him. Without much thought, he handed over a few bills and tucked the journal under his arm, hoping it might spark the creativity he so desperately craved. When David returned to his apartment, he settled into his threadbare armchair and opened the journal. The pages were filled with elegant, flowing script that chronicled the life of a man named Elias Graves. The entries began mundanely enough, accounts of meals eaten, errands run, and musings on the weather. Despite their banality, David found the writing captivating, as if Elias's voice reached out to him through time. But as David continued reading, the tone of the entries shifted. The mundane observations gave way to eerily specific details, events that mirrored moments from David's own life. He read about spilled coffee staining a manuscript, an awkward encounter with a neighbor, and even a visit to the very flea market where David had purchased the journal. The coincidences unsettled him, but he dismissed them as his imagination running wild. The first undeniable prediction came the following morning. The journal described a pigeon crashing into David's apartment window, startling him awake. He laughed it off as absurd, until the thud of wings against glass jolted him from his sleep. He sat up, heart racing, and stared at the stunned bird outside. The unease that settled over him was impossible to shake. Over the next few days, the journal's entries continued to mirror his life with unnerving accuracy. Minor occurrences at first, like misplaced keys or the ringing of a phone call. But soon, the predictions took a darker turn. One entry described a violent argument with his editor, another a mysterious shadow lingering outside his building. Each event unfolded exactly as written, leaving David feeling as though his life was no longer his own. Desperate for answers, David scoured the journal for clues about Elias Graves. He found references to a small town and a series of cryptic notes about an unfinished story, and a curse carried by ink. The final entry was the most chilling of all. The storm approaches. I see the end, written in lines I cannot erase. Death waits for me here. The next day, the sky darkened with ominous clouds, and a violent storm rolled in. The wind howled through the city streets, rattling windows and sending torrents of rain pounding against the buildings. Trapped in his apartment, David couldn't ignore the parallels to Elias's last entry. He felt like a marionette, his strings pulled by an unseen hand. As the storm raged, David's anxiety reached a breaking point. He tried to destroy the journal, tossing it into the fireplace and striking a match. But the flames refused to consume it, the leather remaining unscathed as if protected by an unseen force. Panicked, he hurled it into the trash, only to find it inexplicably back on his desk moments later, its pages open to a new entry written in real time. The writer struggles, but the ink flows still. The end is near. David's hands trembled as he read the words. He grabbed a pen, desperate to take control of the narrative. He scrawled furiously, trying to overwrite the journal's predictions with his own words. But the ink seemed to dissolve into the paper, leaving the original text intact. It was as if the diary resisted his every effort to alter its course. Determined to understand its origins, David turned to the internet and library archives, searching for any mention of Elias Graves. He discovered a series of articles detailing the tragic life of a reclusive writer who had vanished decades ago under mysterious circumstances. Elias had been known for his prolific journals, which chronicled every detail of his life. According to legend, his final journal had been found in his empty home, open to the last entry. The words consume me. I am the ink. I am the page. David's breath quickened as he pieced together the truth. The journal wasn't just a record of Elias's life. It was a trap, a vessel for a malevolent force that fed on creativity and despair. By writing his own death into existence, Elias had unwittingly passed the curse to anyone who dared to open the journal. The storm intensified, the wind screaming like a living thing. David's apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in as he realized the journal's predictions were leading him to the same fate as Elias. The next entry appeared before his eyes, the ink spreading across the page like a stain. The writer faces the storm, his final chapter written. The pen falls, and silence follows. "No," David whispered, his voice shaking. "This isn't how it ends." In a last-ditch effort, he grabbed a knife and slashed at the journal, tearing its pages. But instead of destroying it, the torn fragments reassembled themselves, the words rearranging into new sentences. "The ink cannot be erased. The story will be told." Frustrated and terrified, David realized he couldn't fight the journal alone. He reached out to a literary historian he had met years ago, Dr. Evelyn Markham, who specialized in cursed artifacts and supernatural folklore. When he explained his predicament, Evelyn was skeptical at first but agreed to visit. Evelyn arrived just as the storm reached its peak. She examined the journal carefully, her brow furrowed. "This isn't just a diary," she said. "It's a vessel. A conduit for something ancient and hungry. It feeds on creativity, drawing writers into its web and turning their own words against them." "How do we stop it?" David asked, desperation in his voice. Evelyn hesitated. "If the journal is tied to Elias Graves, we need to sever the connection. His unfinished story is the key. If we can complete it, we might be able to break the cycle." Together, they pored over the journal and the fragments of Elias's life David had uncovered. The unfinished story hinted at a protagonist who defied fate, rewriting their destiny with courage and sacrifice. Using the clues Elias had left behind, David and Evelyn crafted an ending, their hands trembling as they wrote the final lines. The ink fades. The story ends. The writer is free. The moment they finished, the journal shuddered violently, its pages glowing with an otherworldly light. The storm outside ceased abruptly, the silence almost deafening. When David opened the journal again, its pages were blank, the ink gone. The curse had been lifted. David and Evelyn sat in stunned silence, the weight of their ordeal settling over them. For the first time in weeks, David felt a glimmer of hope. The journal was no longer a threat, but a reminder of the power and peril of storytelling. Months later, David began noticing strange occurrences in his life once more. One day, a package arrived at his door, addressed in an unfamiliar hand. Inside was another journal, its leather unblemished and the brass clasp polished to a shine. A note lay atop it, written in neat, looping script. "You finished one story. But stories never truly end." David froze, his breath catching in his throat. The journal felt heavier than it should have, the air around it thick with anticipation. As he flipped through its blank pages, a single line appeared, ink spreading across the paper like a spider's web. "A new chapter begins." David Hartman knew then that the curse was far from over.